Welcome, everyone. I'm just really bummed I can't be there in person. I'd love to be in Zurich, but instead I'm actually doing this from my basement. But still, I got the same message. I'm really delighted to be speaking to everybody, and I thought I would sort of start this conversation by giving some thoughts about digital assets, both what's happened in 2020, how we feel about 2021, but also really speak to sort of some of the things that the industry has to work out, including whether it's ESG, regulatory issues, usability, and at the end of the day, I think there are some things that are happening that are quite positive. So let me sort of jump into this. And if you see the first slide here, this is BTC's price for the last 5 years, and then with an overlay of what is typical of a post-halving. And I think that this overlay is still in place, that digital assets are still in the midst of an upcycle. And despite what's happening in 2021, I still see it as an upcycle. But it helps to start thinking about where we've come from over the past year. The US and the world is emerging from a global pandemic, one that I don't think any of us ever prepared for in our lives, and it's something we won't see for 5 generations, probably again. But it is one that resulted in an economic catastrophe, one where the entire global economy was shut down and financial markets collapsed. This was the ultimate test of digital assets because, as you know, in a world of calamity, one would have expected things that are good hedges against such a thing to perform well. And in fact, that's indeed what happened. Whether it's BTC, Ethereum, Bitcoin SV, all of these performed admirably last year, and the industry really did prove its usefulness. But if I had one criticism to make, it would be that the pandemic was really an opportunity for the industry to become more mainstream, not in the sense that people could buy and sell the tokens and talk about prices, but one where the industry had a chance to get people to quote goods and services in crypto terms. In other words, the best example is NFTs. NFTs really took off, and it is helping people think of digital scarcity, but it is quoted in Ethereum terms. I wonder if the industry really passed an opportunity to really get a lot more of the sort of digital world and analog world quoted in crypto terms. And I think that's really how you drive mainstream adoption. But in 2021, something has happened, because in the first few months, crypto did quite well. And then some headwinds emerged, as we all know, whether it was related to regulatory crackdowns, ESG concerns. But what was triggered is rule number 3 in crypto, which is that as crypto assets, you really can't put new money into these things until they trade above their 200-day moving average. So whether you look at something like BTC, which broke 40,000, and once it fell below 40,000, our rule number 3 kicked in, it means that we're in a place right now where we have to figure out when crypto can sort of emerge from this consolidation period. And I have a few things here to observe on the next slide, but if I could just sort of give a quick overlay, I think that we had a lot of new users come into the digital asset world over the past 6 months, but many of them didn't come for the technology. They came for the memes and for the price. And as a result, it's going to make this market a little more difficult in terms of understanding where the strengths are and where the liquidations take place. And here's a simple slide to show you, the obvious headwinds we've talked about. And I've mentioned many of these, but we have a lot of regulatory uncertainty this year, and crackdowns, and we have ESG. And I think one thing that's important is, much as we can envision digital assets really operating in a digital economy, it's still very dependent on the traditional financial system providing those on-ramps. So I think it's important for the banking industry to really ultimately be somewhat crypto-friendly to really help bridge that world. And that's where we are today. That I think when I look at something like BTC, it's consolidating today. I don't think a crypto winter has started. In fact, today's a great example. We've got a series of negative headlines over the past few days, and yet BTC did not make a new low. And as you know, crypto markets bottom on bad news. So we've had some bad news, and we're seeing some resilience. I think that's a good sign. And then to really sort of conclude this before turning it over to our senior digital strategist, Dave Greider, I do want to highlight the reason we're really long-term structurally positive on digital assets. Part of it is the technology, but a big part of this is that the cohort that's really going to drive the global economy are the millennials. And as you can see here, if you look at this blue shaded chart, this is the share of income that is generated by each generation. You can see the millennial share is increasing steadily. And by 2029 in the US, the largest share of disposable income will be controlled by millennials. And that number is going to set to grow to over 50% by 2038. So again, it's a world where the millennials are really the most important voice to listen to, and they're the ones that are driving adoption of digital assets. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to David Greider.
Thanks a lot, Tom. CoinGeek, it's great to be back with you guys. As Tom mentioned, I'm David Greider. I'm the lead digital asset strategist here at Fundstrat. As you may know from watching some of the prior conferences, or if you've joined, we do have coverage of Bitcoin SV as one of the projects that we have research coverage on. And we put out several reports on Bitcoin SV and what the network and the community has been up to. Today, I'm going to be talking about one of those reports that we recently released. And that report was talking about a focus on some of the blockchain as a service infrastructure being built around BSV for big data-based blockchain applications. And I'm going to go into some of the things that we're seeing on Bitcoin SV that make it unique relative to some of the other approaches that folks are taking. Okay, so if you're going to build a blockchain for different use cases, I think it's very important that you kind of think about what your technical architecture is. And I'm sure you've heard this plenty of times at this conference, that BSV has a very different approach for its technical architecture relative to other systems that are out there. And one of those key technical differences is the way that BSV allows for unlimited, unbounded scaling for its block size, and what that means for the data capacity of the network, which is very unique relative to other approaches that are being taken by different chains for things like how much data you can put on the network, what the transaction speeds are, and it enables a few different use cases that we think are interesting. And one thing that we think is important to distinguish when a lot of folks in crypto, and we talk to clients in the crypto industry who really just think about Bitcoin or crypto just being one thing, we have to think about what kind of different focuses different networks are focused on. And if we look at where Bitcoin SV has forked from and now has emerged to today, I think the focus is really today, you guys have become something that's really geared towards this Web3 movement. And this Web3 movement is really just a play on an evolution of the web that takes what's centralized, mainly dominated infrastructure, whether that be the cloud infrastructure from the nodes, and the hosting to the applications and where the data is housed, and takes that and puts it in a distributed fashion and gives it a verifiable trust layer on an open digital network that can be verified and controlled by the community. So if we think about Bitcoin SV and its this one unique capability of large unbounded block size, and we think about applications in the big data landscape, I think that it actually is what the BSV network is pursuing. It actually is really geared towards these types of big data, enterprise big data focuses. And if you think about how big data and data is going to be such a big part of our world in the future, you have to think about really there's three V's to big data. There's tons of volume. We're generating tons of data every day. And that data is about us, from everything from sensors to everything we click and do. And that data is used for, sometimes scary, but sometimes very good things, like informing our, selection algorithms and making a lot of good recommendations for our lives to healthcare decisions. And that data is moving fast. So, first, if we think back to the volume, big block sizes enable the ability to store big amounts of data on chain. And if we think back to the velocity, those big block sizes enable for a very high level of transaction scalability, which fits within that use case. And if you're going to have a wide set of data being put on chain, then that's the type of structure that you're going to need to be capable of handling a big variety. So just to give a high level on the implementation of this, we're seeing that you are having different businesses. They're building applications on top of the BSV network. You have the MetaNet structure, and folks are putting data on chain. Data can be housed across multiple nodes or miners and different providers, decentralizing that data. And you can have proofs of that data. You could even store that data yourself on chain if you want to keep it or host it with a secured cloud provider that you choose. And that data can be authenticated and verified via hashes, or it can be just publicly on chain. And it can allow for different apps and development environments to be built on top. And that's kind of a new way of thinking about how the web and could be structured. So with that, I'm going to talk about, at a very high level, some of the kind of infrastructure layers that we're seeing being built out on Bitcoin SV, and some of the interesting enterprise and application use cases that are emerging from this after that. So, I do have to say, building a new blockchain network and building a community and building all of the infrastructure, that is not an easy task. Certainly, it takes a lot more tooling than just forking any chain, and it takes a lot more effort than really just putting a bunch of marketing hype around something. So, I think it's encouraging to see, what's been going on here. So if we look at, the Bitcoin SV blockchain really is this base layer that all of these different applications and infrastructure and tooling, right, kind of sit on, right? We see some similarities and can think back kind of the cloud stack in some high level degree. And we're looking at it, we can think about some of the different tooling and some of the different data infrastructure that's built to make it easy for developers to build and use different use cases, which is obviously necessary to onboard new enterprises, as well as a bunch of the different enterprise applications, right, that are going to be covered across a few different use cases that we'll talk about. And obviously, again, the BSV blockchain being kind of the base layer for this, and there being a few different kind of ways to think about this, different infrastructure across a lot of different industries. And we're seeing that there's been several industries that have been coming and forming to build different applications, different use cases on top of the BSV blockchain, which is interesting and encouraging, because it's novel and interesting to see how blockchain actually is kind of coming from this thought process of things that weren't was proposed in 2016 and 17 to proofs of concept that are now getting used across a number of different areas. So in prior reports, we've talked about many different BSV companies, and in this one, we decided to just pick a few and kind of go into each of them, briefly, just to give folks one bit of tangible examples and understanding around some of the interesting things that can be done with blockchain that are being done on BSV in specific. So this one project here, Dominium, they're doing something very interesting by allowing folks who are governments, whether they're land registry or different real estate providers to do land registry on the blockchain, right? And I think that's really interesting because you're putting the data of people's housing, people's ownership of assets. You're taking that and you're forming different systems to put that on the blockchain, and you're giving that a verifiable truth layer, right? That's public. And it's interesting to see that BSV has actually started to work with a couple different governments, in Nigeria, the Bahamas, and Sierra Leone. I think that it's actually something that should, maybe get a little more attention. I know that Bitcoin has gotten a lot of attention recently for what's been going on with some of the other governments adopting it. I think that these things are all very encouraging for crypto in general. And I think that that's, a positive thing to see that public blockchains and governments are engaging in the way that they are. So here's another one that we think is very interesting. So we were talking about how there's this new world of, decentralized applications and data on chain and this new Web3 paradigm. These folks are building here a platform for AR and VR, right? So think back to the Oculus that maybe someone got you for Christmas, but thinking about how that different paradigm could change from Facebook owning all of your data and Facebook controlling the monetizing environment to one where, you have this being kind of more of a blockchain-based kind of open networking system, right? You can put the data on chain for people's location. You can do different types of marketing for that, and that's very interesting when you think about selling virtual goods to people. The ownership of those goods and the different branding, and how that could enable different analytics when all that data is on chain for having truth and verifiability into are you getting the right ad spend and the right marketing for what advertisers and marketers are doing right with these businesses. So Verinet is doing something very interesting for really the pharmaceutical industry, and it's thinking about how you can take the clinical trial data that we all rely upon for the drugs that are being produced, right? Thinking back to, we've just gone through this incredible COVID pandemic, most of us across the globe, and, thinking about how the vaccines have been, rolled out and thinking of how they've been developed. If we think back to that process of developing vaccines and how that's done, this is actually kind of a new way to change how the data of clinical trials is stored, how it's verified, how it's analyzed to prove kind of the efficacy of clinical trial data. So this is kind of a new paradigm where you can take data, clinical trials, you can hash it on chain, right? You can still have the privacy of storing it on the side, but you can have the transparency of knowing when it was done and when it was hashed, and know that it's verifiably true. And you can have this audit record, which is very interesting, and it's actually probably a very good improvement from some current methods that still rely on things like a lab notebook for putting down data and verifying that it's true. And I think that gives a lot of benefits to the healthcare industry and to all of us. And again, moving across different industries, if we're looking at PeerJoin, these folks are another platform that's really focused on the gaming industry. Gaming is obviously a very big industry. It's a global industry, it's internet gaming. And it makes sense that, these global internet kind of cloud native blockchain-based platforms could have a good role in facilitating kind of the next wave of how that industry evolves. So PeerJoin is a platform or a news company that, is helping folks, develop and take kind of full life cycle development and kind of game usage and tracking and analytics across that life cycle. And I think it's very interesting and important how the different types of ways that this games kind of function versus the traditional world, right? You can take these games and you can have them, they're provably on chain. You can prove the fairness of the payouts, right? You can make the payouts at a different scale that you couldn't do before, right? With micropayments, which would be, cost prohibitive at with other payment methods, right? Using the micropayments from the BSV blockchain. And you can really, have trust in that data. And that's a very interesting paradigm shift from some of the current ways that, gaming is done. And we think that could have some interesting potential. So Verinex, we obviously need, infrastructure, and we need experts, and we need folks who can help different enterprises learn how to build blockchain-based applications. It's obviously not a very easy thing. A lot of, people at this conference, myself, we've all spent a very long time figuring out how the technology works. And I think, experts to help enterprises, develop and launch that is very important. These folks are a third-party development service, and, they're really helping different enterprises deploy platforms on the BSV blockchain. And that's helping them work through everything from, the different integrations and how the solutions work. And they've really been able to do a number of different deployments, as we talked about here on the right, and helping folks across a lot of different use cases. Back to the pharmaceutical and kind of the health side, right? VXPass, again, when we talked about COVID, we're all probably very happy to be getting past that point now. And a lot of us have gotten our vaccines. People are getting vaccine passports. These folks here are helping put vaccination data and vaccine passports in a system right on chain that's on a public blockchain for governments, where we can have that in a digital structure, and that can be kind of an open system that's very useful for governments, for the transparency for all of us, and for our safety. And they're already working with some governments as well, which is also encouraging. And we can think about the scale of what that could be if it gets more adoption, given how many of us are getting vaccines and how much that data is going to exist from that. So Matter Cloud is another blockchain-based infrastructure provider for BSV, and if you're thinking back to, again, we were talking about the infrastructure for doing big data applications. There is just like Amazon Web Services and different cloud providers kind of popped up to help folks do different applications on the web. I think this is kind of another example here where for this new paradigm, you can have enterprise software APIs and these different services that can help folks launch and deploy different applications on BSV. And Dot Wallet. Dot Wallet is, again, we have to have our browser to this new Web3 world. We also have to have a place where we can store and own our digital assets, and we can kind of integrate with these blockchains. This is where, this is a wallet and a provider for that, right? This is the paradigm to the web browser, right, of this Web3 ecosystem. And, Dot Wallet has a lot of integrations and partnerships thus far that we've seen. So in my last minute here, I'm going to talk a bit about some of the blockchain metrics and just some of the couple interesting things that we're seeing relative to that. So I think that there's obviously been a lot of different blockchains that have come out over the recent years focused on scalability. Here we compare Bitcoin, Ethereum, BCH, and BSV as the proof of work blockchains, right, which have a focus kind of on this, some more focused on scalability than others, right? But as that kind of as the comp set, right? Because I think that the unique thing about BSV and what they're doing with their kind of Web3 approach and their kind of scalability approach is that of the different ones that are doing it on the proof of work side, I think it's pretty unique in that approach. So just in terms of the transaction counts, BSV has exceeded Bitcoin quite a bit, and BCH as well. And I think that that's been steadily growing, and especially if we can see more adoption of these different types of applications we talk about, that would be good. So transaction fees have also remained low, and that centers back on how BSV is kind of focused on these micropayments and these different micropayment use cases. So again, this kind of focuses to what niche BSV is kind of focused on, and that again allows to lower TX values, as we've talked about here on the right chart where BSV is the lowest. And I know that some folks a large blockchain data size can mean a lot of different things. I think that one paradigm of viewing it is that if you're focused on an application that focuses on big data, and you're focused on an application that focuses on scaling data to across the globe, I think it's interesting to point out for that particular use case that BSV has passed several other blockchains in terms of its data size. So I think if I'm looking at the blockchain data metrics and I'm looking at kind of what has occurred on BSV, we are seeing that transactions are scaling and the use case is kind of playing out from there, and the data is also the blockchain is being capable of storing that data. So that's all very encouraging. And with that, I think that's the wrap up of our presentation. And I just want to thank everyone at CoinGeek for having me back again. We really enjoy working with you all and being part of the community that you guys are, and we look forward to being back next time.
Reimagine the world's financial system. One built on being simple and fair, not one that's overcomplicated, outdated, and broken, and keeps a quarter of the world's population from accessing it. Reimagine your own finances. Do you have full visibility and control of your assets and investments? We believe there's a better way, a new future for financial services. One built on equal opportunity, where possibilities are limitless, not limited, and everyone can live the life to which they aspire. At Fabric, we're weaving a better future of finance for the billions locked out and the billions locked in. A safe, open, and fully transparent financial ecosystem built on innovative technology, where anyone can transform, hold, trade, and grow their assets, all in one accessible place. But this journey isn't ours to take alone. Are you ready to join in? To reimagine a better future with us? Where everything is digital and anything is possible. Fabric. Reimagine prosperity.